Now that we've added in all the features and capabilities that we want our application to do, we're pretty much complete, but there's still a few finishing touches that we need to add to the application. And over this section of the course, we're going to be doing just that. Now there's a few things we want to do. We want to make sure that we've got all the application icons created. We also want to simply make sure that we've set up our launch or our loading screen. But before we can move on to all of those in the next coming lectures, we need to focus and make sure that application runs just as well as it does on iPhone. As to this point, we've solely created the application with iPhone in mind, and it works perfectly on all different iPhone screens. We now need to make sure that it does the exact same on iPad. So pretty much at the start of this course, we said that we're going to be creating a universal application in general. Now, when it comes to building and running this application or this project on an iPad, it is going to work because we've created all the constraints to resize for us. But we've only really designed the constraints to really move and adjust solely for the iPhone. So in this lecture, we're going to focus on making sure the application works perfectly on iPad. So before we do this, let's see exactly how it does look on iPad. Now, if your project is not configured to be universal, I'm just going to get rid of this debug area at the bottom here. Head over to the project name at the very top, and then make sure you're in the general section here, and then scroll down to deployment info, and you can then see your devices. So by me, for default here, we are kind of selected on the ability to have our device or our project only running on iPhone. Now we can simply toggle this and completely change it. So let's select universal. So by doing that, now it allows us to build our application on iPad. Now the difference is, if I built something on an iPad when it was mainly selected on an iPhone, then we're going to get the kind of ×2 ×1 magnifying of an iPhone application that you may have seen when using an iPad on, again, applications that are not configured for universal devices. So by building and running now, it's going to build and run perfectly on our iPad, and the constraints are going to resize themselves again for the iPad. Now, a few more things that I want to take care of before I do this is making sure that our device orientation is only selected on portrait. So we're going to select landscape off and landscape right off as well. So left and right have now been deselected. And because we're not having our application to have the capability to, again, rotate left or right, we also need to make sure that we select requires full screen. So this means because we don't have the left and right features, that we don't have the capabilities to then allow our application to be used like in the multi-screen view that iPad has. So we select that to have requires full screen as well. So what we're going to do now then is go to build and run, and I'm going to select an iPad now. So let's go for the iPad Pro. And I go for the 9.7 inch as it's going to be a smaller simulator. So I'll stop build and running our application on the iPhone simulator for just a moment. And now we're going to go to build and run on the iPad. And there's quite a few different things you're going to see happening. One, it's going to work perfectly and display correctly for us. You see the iPad simulator is quite big, so a way that you can reduce the size of this is by going all the way up to our window, then going to scale, and you see by default we're on 100%. So if I select this 75, again, all it does is scales the actual window of our simulator, not the application itself. So now we're built to run on our iPad. Because we added in all the constraints, you can see now all the objects resize for us. And from the offset, it looks great, but not every view is going to look perfect. And you see we got our home view now. We got our start game button, which is huge, and our logo. I can go to our store section, which again, just wait for a few seconds for it to load up. Displays it all there for us perfectly. I can return back. When it's into our start game, you can see the game now taking place. Again, it's the first time I've built and run it on the iPad, so we're going to have no score at all. But the kind of main gist you can get from this is the fact that all of our buttons look a bit too big. Our kind of labels look a little bit too small. It kind of doesn't feel right within the actual iPad. So what we want to do then is make sure, again, it looks just as good on the iPad as it does on iPhone. Now, not every application that you build is going to be, you're going to want it to be universal. But if you do, there's a brilliant method in how you can almost separate the interfaces for iPhone and iPad. Now, again, if you're creating a very simple interface, then just keeping it as it is perfectly fine. But if you're creating something more complex with all the objects that we have on the screen, then this method is pretty good. So what we're going to do, back into our project, get rid of our debug area there, go into our main.storyboard. We're going to basically create two storyboard files. Now we've got our first one that we've been using throughout our whole of our application, our project that we've been creating, our main.storyboard. We're going to use this as solely being the storyboard files for our iPhone view. We're going to create a brand new storyboard and we're going to solely use that for our iPad view. This allows us then to segregate the two different devices, and maybe we want to change how things look on the iPad because, again, when it blows up, it doesn't always look great. But by doing this, again, our application doesn't know that we created two storyboards and it doesn't know which one it has to load up for which device. So we need to tell our application that if it's an iPad, then load up the iPad storyboard, or if it's an iPhone, then load up the iPhone storyboard. But before we get into any of that, we're first going to set up our secondary storyboard and then start to create our iPad interface. So we go to our project here, I'm going to right click it and then go all the way down to simply add in a new file. And then we're going to head over to our user interface here and select storyboard, press next. Now I simply call it iPad storyboard and then create that into our view. So that then goes on to create our iPad storyboard, which is a little bit confusing, but that's perfectly fine for us. And then you see now within our iPad storyboard, so I drag and drop it underneath our main.storyboard here, it's completely blank. There is nothing in it whatsoever. So what we're going to do is jump back into our main.storyboard, and we're going to select all four of these views here. We're going to highlight all of them now, and we simply press Command and C to copy it. Jump into our iPad storyboard and then press Command and V to then paste it all in. So what that's done then is simply copy and pasted all those views and we've pasted them now into our iPad storyboard, which you're probably thinking, well, then we've just simply got iPhone views within this storyboard. Well, yes, we have, but they have all the actions, they have all the classes, they have all the outlets and all the constraints all linked up. All we need to do is simply change within the view here to one of our iPads. So let's go for the smaller one, as again, it's a little bit easier to then see. So here's all of our views now being displayed in our iPad storyboard, again, iPad sizes. And it doesn't look great from the offset, so let's reduce this down and we're going to go through it one by one. So just for the time being, I'm going to move over the store view just down below and focus on our three game views or our three main views within our application. Now the first thing I need to do is once we call upon this iPad storyboard to load up, we need to tell the storyboard which is the first view that we want to load up, which is going to be our home view. So select the little files owner of our home view. Then all we need to do is go over to the attribute inspector on the right here. You can see we've already got a warning within our project. And that's basically telling us there's no initial view. So we need to make sure that it's toggled is initial view controller. And that creates this small little arrow on the left hand side of it. And that basically tells this storyboard view that this is the first view we want to load when we load up, again, this iPad storyboard. And that's all we need to do there. Now, by taking a quick look at it, you can roughly say that our home view kind of looks okay. It kind of feels just right. So pretty much, we're not going to mess around with that view in general. So I'm pretty much happy with how this looks. It's these two views here which I'm not quite fond of, and we need to change exactly what's going on within them. Now remember, we do have constraints added to these objects, and we're going to keep the constraints in because there is two different versions of an iPad screen. We have our standard one, and then we have our larger one with the two different versions of the iPad Pro. So we keep the constraints in so it can resize, but if we design it to make sure it looks good on this smaller iPad screen, then it will just blow itself up on the bigger iPad screen. So the first thing I want to do then is I'll zoom in a little bit more now so we can completely see this view, is I'm going to go to the size inspector here, and then we can see down below what kind of constraints that we have within our objects. So this button here is the buffer object for all of these objects. Now if you can see right now that these objects all simply then go on to have equal heights. Now these two labels here have equal heights with themselves set at 75, and these two labels here have equal heights set at 85, as you can see there. So we're going to change now the sizes, because I feel like if we change the size of the labels displaying the time and the score, that it will reduce the size of our button, thus looking a little bit better. So from 85, let's completely change the constraint here to going all the way up to 120 and press enter. And you can see exactly how that then changes, which we could do it maybe going a little bit bigger, but let's change this one also to 120. Now you can see that starts to reduce the size of the button, but I feel like it's not quite there just yet. So we got to do this manually because they've individually got constraints on them. So 150 may be the way to go, and also 150 on this one. And how does that look? That could look a little bit better. Now the first thing you notice as well is the fact that the text is going to start to look a little bit smaller too. So throughout all the views we will have to, on some of the views, I feel like this one's okay. Maybe the start game here could change, but we'll get onto that in just a second. So let's focus on the constraints. So let's see. That should be a decent enough space in there for our iPad view. Again, feel free to play around with it and see what you can come up with. So let's then go on to changing the text sizes. So we've got them set at 45. So let's change that now. So let's go for 60. How does that look? Maybe 75. There we go. Perfect. 75 is the perfect size for those labels. And these two here, they're currently set at 30. So how does 40 look? 40, brilliant. I'm very happy with that. It's nice, big and bold. We can clearly see it on our iPad view. And the same goes for our button. That's set at 50. And I'll bring that all the way up to, let's go 80. 80, oh, brilliant. Perfect. So the view looks really, really good. And again, all it's going to do then on the larger iPad screen is just get bigger. But we'll check those out in just a moment. So following what we've done over here, we got our high score here set at 40. These are also set at 40, which will be perfect for us. This one's set at 75. This is set at 70, so let's change this to 75 too. This is set at 80, the button, so we'll also make the start game button here also set at 80. There we go. So making sure that we got the continuity running throughout our whole application is going to work perfectly for us. So we've done our home view, we've done our kind of game view, now our end game view, which you can see these buttons, they look very, very squished. So let's first start then with this label and go to the size inspector. And you can see that this has equal height equals to 63.5. Now it's not linked to any other object, so let's completely change that constraint. So these were linked to 150. This one too is now going to be linked to 150. There we go, making it quite a bit bigger. Now these buttons here, these I believe all have equal heights to themselves. So let's double check, they're all at 40 and there's no constraint making them adjust in size. So let's change these to 75. That makes the button a lot bigger there. So do it for each one, the height equaling 75. And then that should space out just nicely, 75. There we go. Perfect. So that makes our restart button a little bit smaller. So restart button itself, back to the attributes inspector, we're going to change this now to be displaying its text size of 80. Now for these two objects here, we could also quite basically make them the same size as these ones. So back in the size inspector, we've got their heights fixed at 75. And in here, they're fixed at 60. So let's also change those two. So this is the cool thing about redesigning and making sure that you can, make your application look good on iPad is just with the sheer real estate that we have on the screen, we can play around with the objects a lot more. Now again, having separate iPad and iPhone storyboards really allows us to make sure that the iPad version looks just as good without having to go down and deep and adding more constraints and telling them what to do and stuff like that. This is a lot more of a simple method. So let's compare these objects now. So this label, these are kind of header labels, our text within those are set at 40. So let's select both of these, which are set at 30, and increase them all the way up now to 40, so we can keep the continuity going. Our kind of information labels are set at 75, so also this too. We're setting it at 75. Our restart button, that's set at 80, which pretty much is what we got set up there. Now these three buttons here is going to be quite interesting because they're set at 25. So how do they look if I bring them up to 30? We'll try 35. How does that look? I feel like 30 is a good one because I don't want them to be too dominant on the screen. I mean, feel free to adjust them again yourself, but that looks quite smart. I'm quite happy with how that has now turned out. So if I now zoom out, you can see how the application is going to look overall, which I'm pretty much happy with that. Again, it is an iPad screen. There's not many objects on the screen to fill it up as if there was for the iPhone, but how it looks, very, very happy with how it's turned out. You can even probably go on to say maybe you can increase the size of all of these labels overall in general. Maybe, we'll see. We'll see how it kind of looks overall. So we do have them set at our size inspector now 150, but if I selected it to be 175 or 200 maybe, how does that look? 200 could be the way to go. So just like how I'm doing now, you're going to find this in every kind of application that you create, that always when you do, oh, this one's not 175, this is 179. Always when you are creating your applications, the first thing you do and how you adjust something may not be the final thing or the final way that you leave it. You're always going to find yourself coming back and adjusting each object, making sure they look really good. So just by making those labels a little bit bigger in depth, it kind of squashes everything down a bit, doesn't make it feel like it just fully is blown up, because we want to get rid of the effect that it is just an iPhone application blown up. We want to make it feel like it's its own application in general, which I think we've pretty much got that sorted. So all that's left to take care of then is the actual store down below, the store view. So let's place this back up now to the side so we can compare the objects on the screen. So this high score is fixed at 75. This one's not fixed at any height, I believe. Height is equal to button. So the button and the height and the label here have fixed heights. So one of them, if they have equal heights, should have, there we go. So it's our button that has the height fixed. Then our label equals to it, which it's set at 75, which pretty much we can keep it as that. The actual label itself, we can actually change the text size within it. So we've got the cell at 40. We'll also set this to 40. Increase all that all the way up. Our button down here has got the size on at 50. Pretty much leave that as it is. That's completely fine. Our purchase one here, this is fixed to have a height equal to 50. Maybe bring it up to 60. I think that's going to look really, really, well, we could probably say 75 too. How would that look? And then bring up the actual size of the text. We'll bring that up to 35. Are they set at 35 too? They're set at 50. So again, making that still a little bit smaller takes away the dominance of the buttons. And then we have the objects inside here. So we don't have any text being displayed in it at the moment. So I'm going to quickly place in some text to simulate what it would look like again with text. So we've got the label here of our title of our product that we're going to be buying, which this has a height equal to label 1. So that pretty much has the same height to the label there and the same to the button. Now this here is huge on the screen. We probably don't need this to be as big as it actually is. So what I'm going to do then is simply edit this, or simply get rid of it all in general. So select it and then simply press the delete button on the keyboard, or the backspace should I say, and it's now completely gone. So press the backspace when you select it, that removes that constraint. And what we're going to do is then bring up our constraints and then fixate its height, which is currently set, well, it was set at 75. We'll set this now to 125. Add that constraint in, so it's a lot larger, bringing this a little bit smaller. And then what we could also do is increase the text size up to, let's say, 50. And our text description here, it's set at 17, which we could do with being a little bit larger. We'll go to 35 ourselves, so we can clearly see the description of the product that our user is buying. So we'll see how this turns out then. The important thing we want to do is see how it also looks on the larger iPad screen. So this is the smaller one, the 9.7 inch iPad Pro. The 12.9 inch iPad Pro here, how does it kind of look there? Looks really well. The only thing I'm going to really say or comment on is the fact that our return button here could be a little bit bigger for the iPad. So let's adjust that. So this was working, or basically this store here label was working off the same size of our button, and we need to change that. So you see here our constraint, equal height to button 1. We'll backspace and delete that, and then give it its own height, and we'll fixate that at 75 to what all the other kind of header labels were doing. There we go. Then our return button here, what we're going to do, it's got equal heights, or height equal should I say, to 75. We'll adjust this to 150. There we go. It makes it a little bit more dominant on the screen, so it takes away kind of what's going on. So that's pretty much quite thick. Maybe reduce that a little bit. 125. There we go. That's better. I'm a little bit happy with that. What we can do then is increase the text size from 50. Let's see how 60 looks. Oh, perfect. Okay. So on the bigger iPad screen, should I say, how does that then look if I zoom out? Perfect. I'm very happy with now how it is turning out. And on the, again, go down to smaller size. Brilliant. So I'm very happy with how it's now turned out then. So all I have to do then, again, is test it on the simulators. Now, like I said before, if I just get rid of this now, it's not really going to change anything. If I go to start building and running and go to build and run once more, you're going to see that nothing's really changed on the iPad view. It's still showing the constraints and the view from our main.storyboard, which we're now using as the iPhone storyboard. And that's because we need to tell our application that it needs to load up, again, a certain view, well, certain storyboard for us. So you can tell already, if I zoom in a little bit there, just basically going off the home button, it's not really doing anything for us. So we need to tell our application now that it needs to load up the iPad storyboard.storyboard if we're building and running on an iPad device. Now, how do we do this? Well, think back to previously in the course where we've used our application delegate.swift. We use this to change the actual status bar of an application from black to displaying white. Now, this section that's been put in, this function here, of our did finish and launching with options, is basically the view did load of our whole entire application. So as soon as our application loads, this function here gets called upon. So when it sets our status bar to white, we're also going to tell it that if the device we're currently running the application on is iPhone, then go on to load the iPhone storyboard. Else, if it's the iPad, then go on to load the iPad storyboard, and so on and so on. So again, sounds pretty simple, but how do we do it? Well, then we first need to find out what our user's device is. So we can create a simple if statement. So we type in if and we do UI device. So we're going to get the UI device of our user and do .current. So again, it's the current device that they're using. And we can do .user interface IDIOM. So if our device, or the current device of our user is now holding, is equal to a value, there we go. So if it's equal to a value, and that value is going to be if it's an iPhone or an iPad. So we do dot, and we have the ability to pick between CarPlay, iPad, iPhone, TV, or unspecified. So we're going to start with our phone. So if the device, our user's device's interface is equal to the iPhone, then perform what we place within these brackets. Now what we're going to place in here is to tell it to load up the iPhone storyboard. As simple as that. So how do we do it? So we first create a variable that we can reference throughout this section. And we're going to call it our main view. Now our main view is going to be linked to our UI storyboard. So by linking it to our UI storyboard, it knows what attributes I can reference when I call upon it. So now I can call upon our main view at any given time, and that's going to equal a certain storyboard. So we've told it is a type of storyboard variable. Now we need to tell it what type of storyboard it's equal to. So it's going to be linked to our UI storyboard again, and we do our bracket, and we're placing our name with a string and our bundle. So the name of it here is the name of the storyboard file that we want to kind of link it to. So this is going to be for our iPhone. Now our iPhone storyboard is our main default storyboard that we had created in our project called main.storyboard. So in the two quotation marks here, we just simply type in main. Now it is case sensitive, so you can see main's got a capital M, so make sure we got that on. And in the bundle, we're going to leave this to nil because we need to configure it a little bit more. So once we closed up our bundle there, we're then going to go on to create a let. So this is a constant that we're not going to be changing or call upon it throughout the application or anything like that. So this let that we're going to create is going to be basically called VC, short for view controller. And that's going to be linked to our UI view controller. So UI view controller there. And what this basically is going to do now is simply go on to equal our main view dot, and it's going to instant view controller. Instant our view controller, which is the second one there, with identifier. Now the identifier is very, very important. So if I close that up there, and we'll come back to that in just a second. So we can do space as a UI view controller. Now what this means is we've told it that we want to get our main storyboard. Once we got our main storyboard, then we've got basically 4 views within that main storyboard. So which view do we load up? Now even though I've got our kind of home view being the initial view controller, we're not calling upon it as if we would normally do when it first loads up in the application. We can basically select what view we want to load up. So we then need to place in with identifier. So we're going to give our home view a simple identifier. So we're going to jump back into our main.storyboard, and then when we got our kind of home view here, we're going to go to our files owner, and then we're going to go to the identity inspector. And at the bottom here, we're going to give it a simple identity for a storyboard ID. And what I'm going to do is type in iPhone storyboard. Now, highlight it, Command C and copy it, because again, this also is case sensitive and it's very important you've got this in. So once you've added that in, again, within our files owner here of our main view, identity inspector, add in iPhone storyboard, go back to our app delegate.swift, and inside the quotation marks here for the with identifier, paste that now in. So we've got the main.storyboard. We then told it what view we want, because we've only added an identifier to one view, which is the one we're going to be calling upon to load up. We then do self.window exclamation mark to convert the optional wrap over because we're using strings. Then we do root view controller is going to equal our VC that we created just up above. So that's telling the root view controller, the view of our application, what's going to load up, call upon that, which links back all the way to our main.storyboard and our home view. So if I start building and running and then go to build and run, for example, on our iPhone 7 screen, it's going to load up again with our main.storyboard, our iPhone view. It's going to act like nothing has simply changed. But once we've kind of figured this out and seen how exactly it interacts with it, we're then going to load it up on our iPad view. Now we only have an if statement for the iPhone. So if we load it up on our iPad view, so if I go on to select the iPad now, let's go for the smaller iPad view, go to build and run now. What's going to happen now is going to load up, but because the application is set up in a way that the main.storyboard is the default, again, the default storyboard it loads up, it's going to load up that view anyway, because that's the default no matter what device we're running on. So you can see in the iPad, it still loads up the iPhone view. So let's create an if statement now for if, now let's get rid of our debug area at the bottom here, if this device is the iPad. So we do if our UI device dot current dot user interface ID IOM is equal to this time dot pad, which is our iPad, then perform what we place within the brackets down below. Now what it's going to do is exactly the same to what we got set up within the iPhone section. The only thing we need to make different is the storyboard that we're referencing and the identifier of that view. So what we're going to do then is just simply copy this and then paste that in down below. So again, the only difference we need to do then is change the storyboard that we're referencing, which we created our new one and called it iPad storyboard. And again, this also is case sensitive. Can't stress that enough. If you do get any of them, the lowercase or uppercases wrong, it won't work. So we added in an iPad storyboard, and then we're going to go to our iPad storyboard, and just like we did in the iPhone view, go to our home view here, select the files owner, make sure we're in the identity inspector and give it a storyboard ID. I'll call it iPad storyboard this time. So iPad storyboard, highlight it and copy it so we know we can't get the spelling or the uppercase and lowercase wrong. Jump back into our app delegate and then change the identifier here to our new one of our iPad storyboard. So these are now doing different things. And how are we going to know if this is actually working? Well, the last time we built and run our iPad, again, because the storyboard, main.storyboard is a default one anyway, doesn't matter what happens, doesn't matter what device it is, it's always going to choose that to be the default. Now we've chosen to create an if statement for our iPad. And when this loads up, it's not going to load up our main.storyboard. This time, if I stop it from building and running, it's going to load up our iPad storyboard in place. And we're going to tell this by the different sizes of the text within the buttons and so on and so on. It's going to look 10 times better. So there you go. Not only has it loaded up a different storyboard, but everything's adjusted for us. How cool is that? So with the larger button, it's now, the interface is more fixed, more kind of adapted to being an iPad view. How cool is that? So just by finding out what our user's current device is, we can then go on to simply say which interface we're going to be loading up. But as you can see right at the very end, it didn't do what we wanted to do. And that's because when we've got the ability to set up for when the game ends, it pushes to our end game view, we haven't told it that there's now a new storyboard file within our application. All that code really does is tells us what storyboard file it needs to initially load up when the application builds and runs. So let's take a look at why this happened. So within our game view controller, if we scroll now to all the way to the bottom, I believe it is, to where it pushes to our end game view. So you can see straight away the problem. And now that we've learnt about how we can actually, separate the two storyboards and go to a certain view, you can now see that it's always going to go to our main bundle, which is our iPhone view, which we've now selected, and then goes to the identifier of end game. So we need to change that. We basically need to create our very own. If the device is iPhone, do this. Else, if the device is this, do this. So let's completely change this up then. So if you do have any other code that can simply affect if it's an iPhone or an iPad, then you have to always find out what the user device simply is. So we type in here then, like we've done in the actual application delegate, our UI device dot current dot user interface ID IOM is equal to dot phone. We'll go phone first. Then perform what we place within these brackets. And what is it going to do? Well, we can simply copy all this here. Let's get rid of it for now. And paste it in. So if I make this a little bit wider, so it all fits within the view. There we go there. Let's scroll back down. There we go. So again, this all happens if it's for the iPhone, which is exactly what we want to do anyway. So all we do is copy that, paste in a second one for this time if it is our pad. And the difference is we're changing the name of our storyboard file, which is iPad storyboard. Now we're going to keep the identifier the same because we did copy and paste all these views from our iPhone one. So technically our end game view should still have the end game identifier. So let's just double check anyway, just to make sure. We'll scroll all the way to the end now. So we click on the files owner here. Yep, the storyboard ID has end game. So when I build and run now, it won't display our iPhone view. So basically what it's done is jump back to our iPhone storyboard. Even if I press restart, it goes back to our iPad one, but it called upon our iPhone one, which we don't want it to do. So by simply segregating this also for that end action to switch to a certain storyboard file and then view, depending on if it's an iPad or iPhone, we can now see this take place. So again, if you do have any other code or any other features or functions in your application that may affect if it's an iPhone or iPad or switch away from the storyboard file it's on, you do have to go back and make sure that you do change all these up. So when the game actually now ends, if I go to build and run, and you know, we're tapping the bottom where you got a score of 12. Let's see how high we can actually get it. So this is probably the highest score that we've got on iPad. It will now switch to our iPad end view, just like that. And then once we're finished, we can then press restart, takes us back to our home view. One more view we need to check out is our store. So we press our info button, takes us to our store, which you can see now how the ads look. So I'm going to get rid of the AAA on the the label and the text view, but that pretty much looks perfect as well. We can clearly see exactly how it's being displayed. Then return back to our application. There we go. So let's quickly sort that out then. Jump to our interface, go all the way to our labels here and attributes inspector, get rid of the text there. So the default text is now gone in both of those. We'll go to build and run once more just to double check. So basically now we can build and run our application on either the iPhone or the iPad. It's going to detect what our user's device is, and then it's going to go on to simply load up basically a storyboard for either one. We've created two completely separate storyboards, which allows us to adjust interfaces on both devices. We can even add features on the iPhone that we don't want on the iPad, and vice versa, and so on and so on. So let's double check this then. Perfect. This is exactly what I want it to do. So we've now segregated the two views. We've pretty much got it all set up. The interface works perfectly and fluidly. Just like it does on iPhone, it now does the same on the iPad. We're all set up and running. So just like where we had to also add in the ability to detect our user's device when the game ended, you could maybe go a step further. And you could probably say to yourself that because the objects now are a lot bigger, the rounded edges don't really look as rounded as they do on iPhone, like they do on the iPad. You can like simply say that the iPhone rounded edges are a lot better than the iPads. So I'm not going to do it anyway, but you could also try it yourself. Maybe adjust in the viewed load of each view the size of the iPad rounded edges compared to the iPhone. So you could use the ability again to detect our user's device. If it's iPhone, give it a corner radius of 5. Else, if it's iPad, give it a corner radius of maybe like 10, 15 or 20. You maybe adjust that kind of stuff. That's the kind of level of things you can change, again, if you can detect our user's device. We're pretty much all set up there. In the next coming lectures, we're going to be focusing on the application icon and our launching screen.